June 10, 2007 is a day that most television viewers will never forget. On this particular evening, the greatest show on Earth has finally arrived at the end of the line. The emphatic conclusion to more than 8 years of brilliant storytelling. By the end of the night, nearly 12 million people will tune in to witness this moment in history, and not a single one is prepared for what happens next. In the beginning, television and cinema were treated as two totally separate mediums. For most of the 20th century, movie theaters were the exclusive destination for spectacle. If you wanted to see something epic, you'd have to watch it on the big screen. Conversely, television programming was much more transient. It was designed to be consumed in bite-sized amounts, with far lower budgets and quality control than anything in cinema. Essentially, if a film was a gourmet meal, a TV show was a candy bar.
It's no big deal.
Oh!
Back then, movies were billed as a premium experience. People paid for the product up front and expected it to meet a certain standard of excellence. TV was pretty much the opposite. As a mostly free product that relied on advertising revenue, the name of the game was mass appeal. It wasn't long before the industry figured out tried-and-true formulas that would keep general audiences watching. For a show to get on the air, it almost always had to be cheap, innocuous, and derivative. Because of this, television would develop a reputation of pandering to the lowest common denominator. Compared to cinema, it wasn't really respected as a legitimate art form.
And fall down. Funny.
For a long time, there were serious doubts as to whether a TV show could ever achieve the same level of depth as the greatest films. And then along came The Sopranos, which was something else altogether. This is a series I've already discussed once before on the channel, but the purpose of today's video is to highlight the extraordinary circumstances around the show, how a bunch of fictional Italians from New Jersey captured the hearts and minds of an entire nation. To truly understand the cultural impact of The Sopranos, we have to turn the clock back 27 years before it first hit the airwaves.
I want you to rest well, and a month from now, this Hollywood big shot's gonna give you what you want. I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
In 1972, the Mafia was embedded in the American consciousness through one of the most influential films ever made. Generally speaking, it's extremely uncommon for any creative work to excel in both critical acclaim and mass appeal. The Godfather represented a rare moment when the stars miraculously aligned. It is one of just 10 titles since the 1940s to earn the distinction of the highest-grossing film in history. When you look at the other films on this list, The Godfather stands out as quite the anomaly. You'd think that its dark and tragic nature would have held it back from overwhelming popularity. However, this specific film would benefit greatly from its unique place in time. In the United States, the 1970s were a period of considerable social upheaval, not unlike what we're experiencing today. The decade would be defined by economic turmoil, unpopular foreign wars, and growing distrust in powerful institutions. As public opinion began to sour on corporations and politicians, Americans shifted their fascination towards another group of crooks. For the longest time, organized crime had been considered a scourge of society. It's hard to imagine how so many good, hardworking people could be made to sympathize with a bunch of violent thugs. However, America has always had a complex relationship with criminality. Many of us like to act lawful when it's convenient, but disorder is sort of baked into our identity. This nation was founded through rebellion. Most of its territory was essentially swindled from the previous owners, and our world-leading economy benefits heavily from the business of ripping people off. Like it or not, America has always had a lawless streak. Sometimes it's insightful to explore that part of ourselves. The Godfather rose to mass appeal by confronting the public with their greatest temptation. American society places so much prestige in wealth and status that how you get there can often feel irrelevant. Is it really worth all the struggle and toil to pull yourself up by the bootstraps? Or would you be better off taking a shortcut to success? This dilemma was undoubtedly faced by nearly every immigrant group who took their chances in the land of opportunity. Newcomers to the United States have always faced an uphill battle. They are often vilified by the established population who would prefer not to give up another piece of the pie. When it feels like the deck is stacked against you, you start searching for ways to level the playing field. Nearly every major diaspora in America has at one point turned to organized crime. The Godfather in particular features the Cosa Nostra, otherwise known as the Italian Mafia. The film takes place during the height of their power after the Second World War. It tells the story of Michael Corleone and his descent into the criminal underworld. While he's introduced as a straight shooter with noble aspirations, he's eventually consumed by wrath and vengeance, taking his father's place at the head of the family business. When it released, The Godfather was embraced as an instant classic. The film was so iconic that it cemented Italian mobsters as the definitive anti-heroes of America, a trope that would be echoed in pop culture for decades to come. By the 1990s, however, the classic mafia genre was starting to grow stale. Audiences had begun to crave something more contemporary. At the same time, a hopeless director is looking for his first big break. His name is David Chase. Growing up in New Jersey, he studied the lives of mobsters from a young age. After a difficult upbringing, he suffered from panic attacks and depressive episodes throughout his adolescence. Decades later, when trying to get his film career off the ground, he conceives of a neurotic crime boss who spills his guts out every week in therapy. This premise was initially intended to join the ranks of the great Mafia films, but soon enough, Chase makes the peculiar choice to develop the product as a TV series. He shops the idea to various networks, but receives little interest for something so esoteric. Eventually, he finds an unlikely partner in HBO, a cable channel mostly known for movie reruns and pay-per-view boxing. The network had dabbled in original programming, but nothing as ambitious as what Chase had planned. It seemed like an odd fit at the time, but as the world would soon learn, The Sopranos had found its perfect match. HBO's subscription-based revenue model allowed the network to offer far more creative freedom than the rest of the television landscape. With advertisers out of the picture, HBO programming could delve into graphic content that would be unthinkable elsewhere. The absence of commercial breaks removed the time constraints that other shows had to maneuver around, allowing for greater flexibility in storytelling. By 1999, the stage was set for a show unlike any that came before it.
See, it's going to be growth. Income is exactly right. Very well done. Yes.
Welcome to Tony Soprano's world. It doesn't quite have the same glamour or decadence of The Godfather. On the contrary, Tony finds himself at the helm of a mafia in decline. As he puts it,
lately I'm getting the feeling that I came in at the end.
In a broad sense, Tony resembles Michael Corleone, running the family business that he inherited from his father. But he's older, overweight, and balding. He lives in the suburbs and drives an SUV. He eats a lot of cured meats. Instead of action-packed gunfights, his days are mostly filled with aggravating minutiae, financial affairs, organizational politics, and sidestepping law enforcement. It's not exactly flattering, but for David Chase, it was realistic. The Sopranos was created with an eye for authenticity. Chase designed the stories and characters to match his lived experience. He insisted that every exterior shot was filmed on location in New Jersey. While brainstorming scenarios for episodes, he often had the writing staff pull from real-life anecdotes. At a glance, the cast resembled the island of misfit toys, but each member was carefully selected according to Chase's standards of believability. Without a doubt, the most pivotal part of the casting process came down to the lead role. After dozens of uninspiring candidates, the series eventually found its Tony, a mostly unknown actor by the name of James Gandolfini. In time, their likenesses would become inseparable.
I find I have to be the sad clown, laughing on the outside, crying on the inside.
Tony Soprano was a type of character that had never existed before on television. These days, we're used to morally dubious protagonists headlining our favorite dramas. But back in 1999, there were serious questions over whether the audience would accept the star of the show acting evil. Tony has many admirable qualities. He's charming, witty, and charismatic. But it doesn't take much for his pleasant demeanor to turn sadistic and cruel. The show doesn't sugarcoat things. The hero of our story is a violent murderer. He brutally kills people, and when he does, he's hardly adhering to any sort of noble or sympathetic cause. On the contrary, much of his conquest is driven by nothing more than pride and pettiness. A character like this could have easily alienated the audience, but Tony Soprano was portrayed with a great deal of depth. He represented a significant departure from the established image of a mafia boss. Rather than adhering to some stoic, stylized ideal, Tony's vulnerability is put on full display for everyone to see. What's revealed is a deeply insecure man who faces a constant internal struggle between right and wrong. He's being torn between two different worlds and two different ideas of masculinity. On one side is the family man, protective, nurturing, and a dependable source of stability. On the other side is the boss, the general who leads his troops in a battle, a position that satisfies his lust for power, wealth, and sex. Both of these roles would cease to exist without the other, yet each is at perpetual risk of destroying the other.
Are you in the Mafia?
Tony seems to recognize this contradiction, but he can't fully grasp the nature of it. Multiple times throughout the series, he reveals his own idea of manliness.
The kind of man I admire is Gary Cooper, the strong, silent type.
It reinforces the cultural expectation that men are supposed to bite their tongues and coldly do their jobs. That to be strong, you have to distance yourself from any sort of sentimentality. This archetype was pretty much standard for every male action hero of the 20th century, the same image that The Sopranos seeks to deconstruct. Tony is reasonably strong, but he is certainly not silent. He often lets his emotions get the best of him. He suffers from frequent anger outbursts, panic attacks, and fainting spells. Sometimes he gets so depressed that he can't even get out of bed. He cries in front of his therapist. He even gets belittled and humiliated by his elderly mother on a regular basis. These flaws all reek of weakness. They're emasculating, and they challenge Tony's sense of self. But these very same flaws are precisely what make his character compelling. They're what allow a psycho mob boss to be relatable. He may be a killer, but at least he's not cold-blooded. As long as he struggles with some sense of shame, there's still a pathway for his redemption. As presently constructed, Tony is not a good man, but it remains plausible that one day he might be. Of course, esoteric ideas don't amount to much until they're put to the test in the real world. Most far-out concepts fail to connect with people and fall flat on their face. Going in, there was no way to predict whether audiences would care to watch an emotionally fragile mob boss, but as the ratings started rolling in for season 1, HBO soon realized that they had made the right choice. The Sopranos was a hit, and while Tony was certainly the star attraction, nearly every aspect of the product was firing on all cylinders. The show featured cinematic lighting and camera work, a field of expertise that was rarely explored on television. Episodes were given epic runtimes, often approaching the 1-hour mark. The characters were extremely well defined, with complex motivations and long-term arcs spanning multiple seasons. The pacing is gradual and deliberate. Events are given plenty of time to unfold. While the plot is not as explosive as some would prefer, the scenes that do involve violence often escalate to shocking levels. The Sopranos set a new standard in its portrayal of mature and graphic subject matter, introducing the medium of television to unprecedented amounts of profanity, nudity, and brutality. No one had ever seen anything like it, and the ratings continued to soar. People kept tuning in long after the novelty factor had worn off. They were hooked. The Sopranos' first season was already heralded as one of the greatest achievements in all of television, and the series only improved from there. Each new season built upon the momentum of the last. The stakes got higher, the themes got darker. Tony is pushed to new heights in both power and depravity. Soon enough, the series was raking in well over 10 million viewers per episode. The Sopranos had become a cornerstone of pop culture, all while maintaining near unanimous acclaim. By the end of the 5th season, the show would etch its name in history when it was awarded the Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Drama. The victory signaled a watershed moment in television. For more than half a century, the big three networks had maintained a stranglehold over the industry's most coveted prize, and The Sopranos had just broken through the glass ceiling. The show had proven that long-term, complex storytelling could succeed on television. It opened up the floodgates for a new generation of cinematic serialized dramas. All of a sudden, every network wanted their own Sopranos. They wanted the prestige that it had brought to the industry. David Chase, who less than a decade earlier was struggling to find a job, was now at the helm of the most influential show in the world. And it was here, at the dawn of a new era, that he foresaw the end. If a show gets successful enough, it can conceivably go on forever. When TV executives get their hands on a cash cow, very little is stopping them from milking it until it's bone dry. During this process, a once beloved series can turn into something unrecognizable, a pale imitation that fails to capture the essence of what made it great in the first place. After 5 magnificent seasons, The Sopranos had reached the mountaintop. It could have kept going, far into the future, but David Chase sensed that the time was right to finish the story. His magnum opus would be laid to rest how he saw fit. However, concluding the most ambitious show on television would be no easy task. The series would be under tremendous pressure to deliver a worthwhile payoff to years of storytelling. Their entire reputation was at stake. When The Sopranos went off the air for the final time, the lasting impression had to be special. After season 5, the show would enter a year-long hiatus, eventually returning in March of 2006. The 6th season would be released as a double feature with 21 episodes in total, amounting to 1/4 of the runtime for the overall series. The story turns profoundly dark, and the characters are pushed to their philosophical limits. Any optimism that once existed over whether our troubled hero can change his ways has been replaced with a morbid curiosity of seeing just how far he can unravel. In this season, Tony's moral fiber is put to the ultimate test, and when fate offers him one final olive branch to save his soul, he firmly and unequivocally rejects it. The audience is then left with a sullen acceptance that the guy they've been rooting for all along is more monster than man. The final season is filled with an overwhelming amount of dread. Despite all he's sacrificed, the walls are closing in on Tony's whole operation, and when the going gets tough, his true colors start to reveal themselves. The pattern of behavior that's been lurking throughout the series now becomes clear. At every opportunity, Tony is only really interested in his own self-preservation. Everybody else is expendable. The Mafia supposedly distinguishes itself from ordinary criminals by upholding certain ideals of honor and brotherhood. But in the 21st century, when everyone is driven by greed and lust, these principles are merely an illusion left over from a bygone era. Tony may have the wealth and power to match the godfathers of the past, but at his core, he's just another thug. As the end draws near, you get the sense that Tony is headed towards some sort of ultimate judgment. He has made too many enemies. Rival gangs and federal agents are all gunning for him. There's a rising tension centered around just when the other shoe is gonna drop. The Soprano crime family then finds itself in an all-out war. The violence rages all the way into the grand finale of the series, Season 6, Episode 21, Made in America. After sustaining heavy casualties, Tony's battalion is on its last legs. But just before the bloodshed reaches him, the two parties manage to defuse the conflict. The last of the threats are dealt with, and Tony has once again eluded his reckoning. There is little triumph to be found in this victory. When the dust settles, the Soprano crew has been rendered almost unrecognizable. Out of the iconic band of brothers we've gotten to know throughout the story, hardly any are left standing. Tony remains rattled and paranoid, still suspecting that the worst is yet to come. In the end, he sits alone at an unsuspecting diner. He is joined by his true family, the select few people for whom this was all supposed to have been worth it. Thus far, Tony has spent most of the series in a fractured, estranged relationship with each of them, but today there's a rare moment of peace. Saccharine music starts to play over the scene. It seems like the story's wrapping up on a high note, but something feels off. The tension that's lingered throughout the season hasn't really gone away. Tony is visibly distracted. He keeps scanning the restaurant as if he's looking for someone. The framing and editing of the scene are unusual. The camera keeps cutting between seemingly insignificant details. By now, any longtime viewer of the show is starting to feel uneasy. Your intuition is screaming at you that something is about to happen. As the scene drags on, the suspense keeps building. You start to wonder what it's all leading up to, how this could possibly play out. A bunch of scenarios begin racing through your mind. It's all come down to this, a moment that feels like everything, and then nothing. At first, most of the viewing audience figured that there must have been some kind of mistake. Surely their signal cut out or their television set was malfunctioning at the worst possible time. But when the credits started rolling, all that confusion turned to disbelief. The Sopranos had just ended with 10 seconds of a silent black screen.
You don't think that should be just like a giant middle finger to them?
Well, at least it didn't end like The Sopranos, where it just cut to black in mid-sentence.
The reception was polarizing, to say the least. Lots of viewers felt cheated, and it's hard to blame them. In the immediate aftermath, you had to wonder whether David Chase's hubris had turned to pure stupidity. When people were presented with the idea of a Sopranos finale, they were anticipating something grandiose. They wanted high stakes and heart-wrenching drama. Compared to the expectations, the true ending must have felt downright anticlimactic. I mean, really, an abrupt cut to black? That's what they came up with to conclude what was supposed to be the greatest show in history? There was nothing conclusive about it, but maybe that was the whole point. Because even in the midst of all the shock and outrage, there was still a part of the audience who knew right then and there that what they had witnessed was brilliant. They just couldn't yet explain why. For David Chase, that simple cut to black was merely the final step of a monumental undertaking. While conceiving the final scene, he considered numerous possibilities. A more by-the-books option would have involved Tony retracing his steps from the intro sequence to the show, driving up the New Jersey Turnpike to confront the crime bosses of New York City. However, Chase ended up deciding on something far more enigmatic, a scenario that no one could have possibly predicted. The plan was then sworn to absolute secrecy. Practically the entire cast and crew were kept in the dark. Chase went so far as to distribute falsified scripts which omitted or replaced the true ending. When they eventually filmed the diner scene, no one involved suspected that it had any significance. All this subterfuge was meant to serve a specific purpose, preserving the maximum impact of that final shot. By the end of production, only Chase and a lone editor knew the ultimate outcome of the series. The rest of the world would have to wait and see. There's comfort to be found in a smooth resolution, but The Sopranos was never a comfortable show, and David Chase understood this better than anyone else. He recognized that the lasting impression of the series had to be unsettling and cryptic. This decision sought to achieve two separate objectives. The first was to keep the show in the public memory long after it went off the air. The second was to make people revisit the prior 85 episodes in search of answers. Perhaps he gazed far into the new era of television that he helped usher in, to a future where years of storytelling could be experienced in a matter of days, where the smallest design choices could be broken down and analyzed ad nauseum by people with too much time on their hands. In his final act of clairvoyance, David Chase left the rest of us with a puzzle, knowing it would make his magnum opus live forever. More than 18 years later, and we're still trying to solve it. Over all this time, numerous theories have come and gone over what really happened, and nearly all of them fall within two different schools of thought. The first and most plausible theory states that the cut to black represents the death of Tony Soprano. Death is one of the strongest motifs in the series. Tony spends the whole plot surrounded by it. The big question that looms over the story is when all that death is gonna catch up to him. What if the final moments of the series are simultaneously Tony's final moments? What if some loose end that Tony forgot about went into that diner and assassinated him? There would have been no shortage of motive for it. Tony has made so many enemies throughout the show that it's hard to keep track of them all. Plenty of guys, including people in his own crew, could have pulled the trigger. And while there are numerous theories as to who was ultimately responsible, the prime suspect has to be this individual, credited as the man in the members-only jacket. His official cast listing is oddly specific. While the other background characters are described with general labels such as old man or truck driver, this particular gentleman is defined by a rather precise detail of his outfit. Of course, the phrase members only is a pretty clear allusion to organized crime.
Look at this guy. Members only? How long you been wearing that?
His general appearance and demeanor are suspicious, and the scene also draws far more attention to him than any other extra. These clues seem to indicate that he is a noteworthy individual, but perhaps the strongest clue can be found, oddly enough, in The Godfather. The series makes several references to the film, but one scene is explicitly mentioned as Tony's favorite. The part where Michael Corleone retrieves a hidden gun from the bathroom and ambushes his enemies in a restaurant.
Because every time we watch Godfather, when Michael Corleone shoots those guys in the restaurant, you sit there with your fucking bowl of ice cream and you say it's your favorite scene of all time.
As it turns out, the last we see of the members-only guy is a shot of him entering the bathroom. If the Godfather scene is meant to be interpreted as a prophecy, then Tony's demise must come shortly after. Based on the evidence laid out in the show, this is certainly a compelling explanation.
I mean, yeah, our line of work, it's always out there. You probably don't even hear it when it happens.
However, when it comes to the finale, there are those who subscribe to the opposite theory, that the end of The Sopranos is all about survival. This perspective is primarily inspired by the specific song that plays out the final scene, Don't Stop Believin' by Journey, a sentimental tune that, at face value, feels out of place for such a defining moment of the show. Its inclusion was a bizarre choice, one that seemingly contradicts the somber tone of the entire rest of the episode. The juxtaposition is so powerful that it almost feels like the song is mocking the scene itself. There's a particular line in Don't Stop Believin' that stands out in the context of the show. It mentions how the movie never ends. It goes on and on and on and on. The entire finale is undercut by a theme of stagnation. There is no great moment of catharsis that inspires everyone to turn over a new leaf. Rather, it appears that after all the bloodshed and toil, everything's just going back to business as usual. By the end of the series, Tony shows a disturbing lack of progression. All of the years of therapy and soul-searching seem to have had no effect. If anything, he only used these things to become a better criminal. In the end, he got exactly what he wanted. The depression and panic attacks have stopped altogether. He's finally free to live life unencumbered. Instead of grappling with any sense of morality, he learned to abandon it. The movie never ends. We're just forced to stop watching. Tony will continue to survive and probably thrive at the expense of everyone around him. The cut to black doesn't represent the end of Tony, but rather the end state of Tony. He has reached the point of no return. The moment the show ends is the moment Tony finally drifts beyond salvation. He has accepted the total corruption of his spirit and will spend the rest of his days wandering the hell that he created. This interpretation is quite abstract. It challenges you to consider what the show represents rather than what it literally depicts. Plenty of people have weighed in about what the whole thing means, but at the end of the day, it's all a bunch of conjecture. Whether you believe Tony's alive or dead, there's only one man who knows the true answer to that question. Over the years, David Chase has been badgered relentlessly about what really happened. For a while, he understandably played it coy when it came to offering any definitive answers. But in 2024, in the official Sopranos documentary, he did divulge one unique piece of insight. While working on the finale, he thought of a technique used at the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey, a visual device where a character's point of view sets the framing for the subsequent shot. This simple method produces quite an ominous effect, where it feels like a character is staring into their own destiny. Chase would go on to use this exact setup numerous times in the final episode, where Tony seemingly enters his own perspective. With that in mind, you have to question whether it was intended to carry over to the final shot, where Tony's POV turns black. This would make the death theory a lot more likely, but just as David was going to tell us more about it,
the truth is,
well, he did it again. Perhaps the question should not be whether Tony is dead, but if he deserves to be. To answer this, we have to venture far beyond the purview of the show itself. The end of The Sopranos produced a unique real-world effect for those who watched it live. When the screen cut to black, millions of people were left staring at their own reflection. Before we can cast judgment on Tony Soprano, we have to consider who created him. For as much as we vilify the Mafia, they are in many aspects just a mirror image of the society that surrounds them. Many Americans who tuned in to The Sopranos had come to view Tony as their own alter ego. For the average Joe confined to suburban life, he represented an escapist power fantasy. They envisioned themselves as the man with limitless wealth, who could spend all day sleeping with beautiful women, the man who was respected by his peers and feared by those who actually knew him. Tony's status had become an object of desire. Watching him antagonize others was a guilty pleasure. But when the time came to ultimately judge Tony for his sins, a lot of us were left with an unsettling dilemma. If we covet this much of Tony's lifestyle, just how close are we to becoming him? What if Tony's pathologies are not caused by the Mafia and are instead the product of American society?
Lately, I'm getting the feeling that I came in at the end. The best is over.
When I wrote the beginning of the pilot, what I was talking about was America. I just had sense that things were really going downhill. The comic part of it for me was that Americans had gotten so materialistic and so selfish that it made a mob boss sick.
But you know, the heyday, the golden age or whatever of the mob, that's gone, and that's never coming back.
In the past 50 years, the influence of the Mafia has declined considerably in the United States. This trend has been attributed to a variety of factors, mainly increasing federal crackdowns and modern racketeering laws that attack criminal organizations on a structural level. However, I believe there is a more implicit reason for why the Mafia feels so much less relevant today. They were never truly conquered. They were just replaced by other institutions in American life. The Mafia used to stand out in its propensity to lie, cheat, and steal, but in modern America, these things are hardly unique. You could say that the spirit of the mob has seeped into nearly everything else in this country. Politics, economics, healthcare, and even the attitudes of the general public. As the American dream has slipped out of reach for more and more people, everyone's getting tired of playing fair. Maybe this can help explain our newfound cultural obsession with the anti-hero and why characters like this keep showing up in popular fiction. Life in the 21st century has twisted the very idea of heroics. Most of the hallowed institutions that previous generations have looked towards for moral guidance have since been exposed as fraudulent and corrupt. And if our heroes can no longer be trusted, the so-called bad guys all of a sudden start to look much more appealing. If the most illustrious people in society cannot practice virtue, then why should anyone else? The truth is that in modern America, people aren't sure anymore whether the wicked are truly punished. Maybe that's what makes the end of The Sopranos so unnerving. We turn to fiction for decisive answers to abstract problems. The story is supposed to deliver us to a point of finality. Either the hero succeeds or he fails. Either he lives or he dies. We can't be expected to figure it all out for ourselves. That just takes us back to square one. But what if that was all by design? To create a moment so jarring that it allows the greatest questions of the show to break out of their physical medium and leak into reality. It invites us to search for the answer in our world. Perhaps The Sopranos was always meant to be more than a story.
It is Wednesday night, and the big story on Action News tonight is the death of James Gandolfini.
On June 19, 2013, James Gandolfini dropped dead from a heart attack. He was only 51 years old. In a haunting echo from the past, no one had any idea what was coming. It was all business as usual, and then he was gone. When Jim departed, so too did any ideas of a possible Sopranos revival. No one in good conscience would dare to continue the story without Tony. What's done is done, and the end of The Sopranos will remain locked inside of Schrodinger's box forever. The cut to black is the simplest trick in editing. Anyone can leave 10 seconds of blank space on the timeline, but it takes a true master to know precisely when to use it. If you do things just right, you can turn nothing into everything. In many ways, this single moment has transcended the legacy of the show itself. I must confess that I was too young to watch the finale when it aired, so I personally missed out on what was quite possibly the most shocking moment in the history of scripted television. But as I got older, I kept hearing people bring it up. This went on long after the show was off the air. People never stopped being obsessed with it. For the longest time, the only thing I knew about The Sopranos was how it ended. The show was spoiled before I ever saw a single episode, but rather than ruin the experience, it only pulled me in further. I had to see what all the hype was about, and what I found was one of the single greatest works of American fiction. Sometimes the purpose of the destination is to lure you into the journey. I guess you could say, I came in at the end, but the best was yet to come.